Let's tell you about the Transport Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga earlier held a media briefing presenting a different side to the story of the Santaco versus City of Cape Town impasse. Nqobile Madlala is standing by to speak to the Transport Minister. Nqobile Madlala, who says there's nothing wrong with the bylaws of the City of Cape Town, but if they infringe on national regulation, then there's a problem.
Well, of course, there is indeed. And in fact, the minister was just saying that there are a lot of also name calling that has come out because of what has occurred. And now we're going to speak to that minister to speak to us about this. And Minister, I think first of all, everyone wants to know, when can we expect the strike to end? So when are you going to be in Cape Town?
First, I think I have to condemn any violence that is associated with the strike, be it from the taxi industry itself, from the communities, or even from the law enforcers. We think we have a right to strike, but that right calls for us to strike peacefully. And I think we need to condemn that with the strongest form of words that we can actually express. And it cannot be that when we march or when we strike, we think that there must be violence accompanied with that. As government, we're going to act on that, and we think that we're already acting. A number of people have been arrested, and they're going to face the full might of the law. Secondly, we would wish to see the strike coming to an end. Of course, that the taxi industry has put conditions to say that will happen if and only if the issues that are the cause of the strike are addressed. That will be the impounding of their vehicles, particularly on the basis of the wrong legislation, which is the National Road Traffic Act, which by itself does not call on any of the infringements to impound any car. Yes. It is only in the National Land Transport Act, Section 87, that you can impound a car, and the conditions are there on why would you impound a car. Now, if you're going to use another legislation and use the operating license conditions to add something that is not in the legislation, we believe that is against the law.
And I mean, I want us to go into that National Act and the National Road Act you speak of, Minister. Could you kindly just separate the two for us so that we understand what is in what?
In the main, the National Land Traffic Act, it's about the public transport in the main. It talks to the conditions for the public transport, and therefore the taxi industry will be there to say, the taxi industry, how do you apply if you want to operate? What are the structures that are there at provincial level, at national level, at local level? And then, of course, what are the forms that you have got to fill? And then, of course, what are the conditions, for instance? And therefore, when you already have, you are operating, you have the operating licenses, for instance, if you transgress the law, what then are the sanctions? And therefore, it is in that Act, National Land Transport Act, where you then have Section 57 actually giving conditions for impounding a minibus, which will be your taxi in this case, with the operating license. And that therefore says you will definitely have to, in order for you to operate, you must have the operating license, your vehicle must be roadworthy, and so on and so forth. So it talks to that. And then, of course, you've got the National Road Traffic Act, which is now about what is happening on our road and the traffic per se. That your car must have your number plate, that your car must have working in roadworthy. Let me just say that it must be roadworthy, and how must you drive on the road? And therefore, if you are found infringing the law on the road, then it sets sanctions. For instance, let me say, if you are speeding above 30 kilometers on just an ordinary provincial or small road, then of course you can be arrested for that. You're driving above 40 kilometers per hour to the prescribed speed of that road, but it is a national road, then of course you can be arrested for that. So you've got that. Now, I can't then say to you, and I found you driving on a national road at a speed that is above 40 kilometers per hour. then I arrest you and I impound you. Or I don't arrest you, but I impound your car. Because that is not the sanction that is in the legislation.
So now, one would think that perhaps the city has come up with some bylaws. And what I want to get from you is that, Minister, then is it wrong for the city to come up with bylaws? Because you already said that this is illegal. And if it is, then what is it that is a punishment when something like this occurs?
It is not for any city, for any local government to come up with bylaws. In fact, it is their constitutional right to do that. However, no bylaw, no any conditions can be in conflict with the national legislation. Like no national legislation can be in conflict with the Constitution. And that is why from time to time we take into court. Right now we have just won a court battle at a constitutional court level where the author was saying ARTO is not constitutional. And the Constitutional Court said, no, it is indeed in the letter and spirit of the Constitution. So these things get tested. If the Constitution had found that ARTO is not in the spirit and not in line with the Constitution, it was immediately going to be validated. Sometimes they go to a particular section of the law and say, this is the section that rendered this act and therefore remedy it. Now, you cannot have bylaws that are in conflict with the national legislation. And you cannot have a situation where you change the national legislation in order to suit your situation and add things that do not help, that are not in the national legislation. So if for drunken driving, you can only be arrested or fined, I can't add, because I'm Minister of Transport, I can't add that I will also impound your car, because it's not in the legislation, and I can't use discretion on those issues, because if we were to allow that to happen, then we'll have crisis in South Africa.
Minister, the negotiations are on the table, and already there is some sentiments from the taxi industry that it feels like that perhaps the city is trying to get rid of the mode of transport. What are you picking up then in these negotiations? Is this the case?
The challenge will be if you're going to have 6,000 cars impounded, taxis being impounded. On the other side, you issue operating license up to about 3,000 to the e-hailing sector. That doesn't augur well. It might actually make people to think anything, including what you think the taxi industry is saying. It cannot be that you're going to use anything in order to punish the taxi industry. They don't pay anything less than 2,500 each time the car is impounded. And yet, if you look at the conditions in their operating licenses, they're actually saying this car will be impounded at any time. You smoke in a car, they say. You are alone in a taxi and the driver is smoking. You shouldn't do that. But really, do you think that you should impound the car for that? The light is cracked. You impound the car for that? The car is fine. It's just a crack. Many of us will have even windscreens that are cracked. For whatever reason, a stone will crack your windscreen. Really? Impounding a car? So these are the things that they are saying, that they're actually happening. So the chances are that your car will be impounded at any time you leave the car, you leave your house. And that happens on the basis of a wrong legislation. That does not give anyone the right to impound. Only the National Land Transport Act in Section 87 that actually gives the conditions for impounding the car. And that is our argument. And that is why we feel, as the Department of Transport, that any car that is impounded on the basis of the National Road Traffic Act, that must be released without conditions, without anything being paid. Because in the first place, the decision was wrong to impound the car.
All right. Thank you very much for speaking to us. That is the Minister of Transport, Sindisiwe Chikunga. Thank you very much for speaking to us. And you can hear there, Dudu, I think there is a sentiment that even though there is a feeling by the taxi drivers at this point that they are being not listened to, but the Minister is saying that they want to negotiate and have those conversations. But it's simple. The 6,000 taxis must now be released.
Nqobile Madlala, thank you very much for